Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
My friends, when are they going to learn? When are the rhinos going to learn that if you are on the wrong side of your, partnership with Trump and his agenda, America First, and all these things, when are they going to realize that they are putting themselves in a major disadvantage? We have Republican primary in Texas yesterday. Republican primary in Texas where Ken Paxton defeats John Cornyn, and it wasn't even close. Keep in mind that Cornyn was the incumbent. He lost by nearly 30 points, I believe. Lost by nearly 30 points. This, it's just time and time again that this happens. It is predictable. The Trump first agenda, or the America First agenda that Trump has, is incredibly popular with Trump's base. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're also going to talk about some comments that were made by Stephen Miller yesterday, talking about fraud in our system of government, specifically fraud in our entitlement programs, in our programs that are designed to help people, and how much that's been taken advantage of. And even though the left, and remember, these are the sorts of things that Doge was looking into back when Trump first took office here this second term, the left doesn't want to admit that any of that is a real thing. So I want to talk about that as well, my friends. And it is my pleasure to be here with you today. I should tell you, thank you for joining us. If you have thoughts, questions, anything like that, you're free to text those to us, 317-785-1030, 317-785-1030. You can always email Todd at toddhuffshow.com as well. And it is my absolute pleasure to be here with you today, my friends. Think about this for a moment. Our investments are like seeds we plant. They grow, they multiply, but are those investments bearing the type of fruit, the kind of fruit that we want? At 48 Financial, they believe your money should reflect your values. They specialize in wealth management and biblically responsible investing, screening out companies that do not align with your faith. It's all part of their purpose-centered financial planning, helping you live a life of meaning and purpose. Want to see if your investments align with your values? Just visit 48financial.com/Todd. That's 48financial.com/Todd. 48 Financial is here to worry about your money so you do not have to. All right, let's go first here. And I did an episode where we talked about these very things just, was it last week or the week before last? When Bill Cassidy had the same thing happen as an incumbent, where he lost. He lost in the primary, finished third, in fact. Think about that. He finished third as a Republican incumbent in the state of Louisiana. You know, I'll tell you a lot of things here that are different in this political climate, in the sort of standard way that things happen. If you're an incumbent, you are typically safe, at least in your party's primary. Now, there, of course, are examples throughout history, but typically, if you're an incumbent, you have a tremendous advantage in keeping in keeping your position. Now, it's interesting. I always find this fascinating. Congress has an incredibly low approval rating, but incumbents are reelected constantly, consistently anyway. And it's as though people are saying, we don't like Congress, we don't approve of what they're doing, but our guy, our girl in Congress is not the problem. That seems to be what the American voter typically seems to say. However, in this particular climate, it is not safe to be an incumbent, especially if you are an incumbent who opposes the America First agenda. If you oppose Trump. Now, I understand we don't want blind allegiance and blind loyalty. I'm a guy who consistently finds myself standing in favor with the Trump agenda, America First agenda, the conservative agenda. I know that Trump is not a principled conservative. I don't say that as an insult. That's just not how he looks at this. He's practical, and once you understand the issues, the conservative solution is the practical solution. If you dig deeper than the superficial way of looking at things, as the media has trained many Americans to do, as the Democrat Party has become masters of using that to manipulate the American voter and so forth, a lot of people will never see beneath the surface the complexity of an issue, or even just something beyond, someone's race, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, those sorts of things. Choosing to focus exclusively on those sorts of things that I call superficial, while refusing to look at the issue and how it pertains to our overall liberty, the role of government, what they should be doing to begin with. And so Trump's his position often is in alignment with conservatism, even though he doesn't get there maybe the same way that someone like I would or someone like you would. That's okay to me. I don't need someone who agrees with me on 100% of the things, including how we arrive at a particular solution to an issue, to a problem. But that's, I think, the reality of the situation that we find ourselves in. But Trump his agenda is popular with his base anyway. And the primary is the time when the base comes out. These are the Republicans who are very concerned about this nation, the direction of this country. And if Trump comes out and says this particular candidate needs to be voted in, or this particular candidate needs to be voted out, that resonates with the American voter. It resonated in Texas. It resonated in Louisiana. It resonated here in my state of Indiana. Trump here in Indiana was lobbying for, or campaigning for, if you will, certain state Senate Republicans. And we've been through this a lot. I don't want to rehash it, but these Trump campaigned against Republican state senators in Indiana who opposed redistricting. Trump was pushing for that in a major way. These Republicans in Indiana, these Senate Republicans, a lot of them, or several of them, would not go along with it. And so Trump said, we're going to campaign against these folks. Turning Point Action said that they were going to campaign against those folks, and they had tremendous success in defeating, again, incumbents. So it's a fascinating, if you can take a step back, it's a fascinating situation we find ourselves in, because it's not common. It is not common for the sitting president of the United States to intervene in his own party's primary process and endorse candidates who are not the incumbent. But he is remarkably successful at this. And this drives the left batty. Now, if there's an example of Trump endorsing a candidate and that candidate loses, of course, the headlines read, Trump is losing his grip on the Republican Party. He's a lightning rod. He doesn't, it's not a good thing to get his endorsement and all this sort of stuff. But time and time and time again, I'm not saying that scenario that I just mentioned doesn't happen, but the one that's much more common is what we saw yesterday in Texas, where Trump endorses someone who is not the incumbent in a Republican primary, and they come out victorious, whether this is for U.S. Senate or, as in the case of Indiana's elections, state Senate. So, when are they going to learn? That's the question. Or are they going to learn? There's another story out here that I didn't mention off the top, but I am going to mention it here as well because it is a fight similar to what we had here in my state of Indiana. Townhall.com here says it was a setup. Why the South Carolina GOP nuked the redistricting effort. So again, you know that we are having in this country a larger fight over redistricting in all states, but in the Republican Party in particular, states that are red. As I've shared on this program many times before, the Democrats suddenly want a truce. They want a truce, and they say any redistricting, especially here mid-decade, is considered something that we should never do. It's a threat to our democracy. They're trying to disenfranchise minority and Democrat voters by doing this. That's not at all what this is about. These folks still get to vote, just like you get to vote in Massachusetts if you're a Republican, even though the chances of winning in those districts is very unlikely. Connecticut the same way. These blue states have all but eliminated Republicans' chances of winning any seats in Congress because of the way that their districts are drawn. And they have squeezed as much metaphorical lemon juice out of the lemon as they possibly can in those states. And so suddenly they want a truce. So for the first time ever, they care about the district lines, where those are, whether they are favorable to Republicans or Democrats. I have been remarkably consistent on this, my friends, as I am with most things, as you well know. But I've been remarkably consistent on this. I've said the Constitution gives the authority to draw congressional districts to the state legislatures. That is undeniable. It's right there in the text for you to see. It doesn't say you can only do this every 10 years. Now, states, again, can have their own laws, sometimes amending their own constitution as to when they can redistrict and how they can do that, whether or not it is within their particular authority to do so, or whether or not they've got to bring in some blue ribbon commission or whatever. But that's not because of the Constitution's limitations. That's because of the rules that the states individually have set up. And we've seen this. That's why Virginia's got struck down, my friends. I've been through all this. I don't want to rehash it. But anytime I think we're talking here about Trump, his agenda, he wants Republican states to do this. I think Republican states should do this. Redistricting is purely political. In fact, I give an open challenge. I've not had a single person, by the way. I've had people tell me that they would talk with me about it when the time's right, of course. The time never becomes right, my friends. I don't know why. I can only speculate as to why. And I'll be very nice. I'm not enemies with people who disagree with me on this. Again, you can be a reasonable Republican and conclude that we should not be redrawing these districts now. That's not a matter of morality or something like that. It's the exercise of political power and whether or not we should do it. I happen to think it's worth it to do that when the consequences are so high, when, babies are being murdered or the trans agenda is being pushed on young people, destroying their lives, when the economy is in shambles, when one side wants to have open borders and absolute lawlessness in this country. Forgive me for thinking those people should not be given any advantage whatsoever in any district so far as it can be prevented from them having an advantage. That is dangerous. That is the prerogative of the states. I know it's uncomfortable for some people to hear, but it is a legitimate exercise of political power, especially when there's no extreme gerrymandering going on. The extreme gerrymandering comes in blue states. And friends, that is by fundamental design. Look, Republicans are not concentrated in, say, urban areas. So Republicans are spread out more in the suburbs, in the more rural areas of a state, if some states have really rural areas. But you know what I mean, less populated, small towns and that sort of thing. Those Republicans are spread out. And so Democrats are the ones who have to get very specific with where they draw their lines and gerrymander, because they have to split up a smaller area into more districts. Whenever that's how they, and then they try to extend it into the larger areas where more Republicans are, and that's where you get these funny shaped districts and so forth. But the bottom line is, Republicans have every right to do this, and Trump says that he wants to do this. The fate of who controls the House of Representatives is on the line here. We may very well have, if these Republican states do not redistrict, like South Carolina, like Indiana, if some of these states drag their heels or don't want to engage in that particular fight, there can be tremendous consequences, including, if Democrats win, you know exactly what's going to happen. The agenda, Trump's agenda of America first, returning us to our constitutional roots, getting rid of fraud. We're going to get into that here in the latter half of the program. But government waste, fraud, and abuse, Democrats are not against that. It's wild to me. Literally, they fight Doge when Doge was actively and out there with the headlines anyway, eliminating or identifying anyway things that were happening, waste that was happening within our federal government. The Democrats were either denying that it was really happening, defending it in some cases. These folks are against all sorts of things that are common sense. They were against the things that secured our border. They have created their ideas anyway. Sometimes individually they weren't in positions of power to put us, to create the scenario, but the same ideas that they endorse today are the ideas that have gotten us into the predicaments we are in today. Situations like Iran, for example, ignoring that, kicking the can down the road. I mentioned open borders. I didn't mention, but inflation as well. The left has never met a tax they don't like. They've never met a government spending program they're not a proponent of, unless, of course, it's national defense, which is actually one of the few things Congress is tasked with providing here in this great nation. So if Democrats win, we know what's coming. There's going to be obstruction. There's going to be investigations. There's going to be impeachments, maybe impeachments plural. So you look here at what's happening in South Carolina. I'm going to go back to this article really quickly, try to squeeze this in and what remains here in this first segment, written here by Matt Vespa, townhall.com. It's finished, everyone. The effort to redraw South Carolina's congressional maps has been stopped by Republicans in the state Senate. The upper chamber in Columbia voted 20-24 to prevent the change. About a dozen Republicans joined Democrats. This, by the way, is almost the spitting image of what happened here in the Hoosier state, the great state of Indiana, back at the beginning of the year. We cleared a major procedural hurdle over the weekend when the Senate invoked cloture on the second reading of the map. We needed a third reading before sending it back to the State House, but the South Carolina GOP deliberately delayed it. It became clear that the map wouldn't be ready by the start of early voting. Early voting undermined Virginia Democrats' map. We talked about Virginia and how the courts did stop that. That was a blue state that tried to redistrict and was prevented from doing so because they violated actually lots of their state laws and rules and the constitutional amendment there and so forth. But anyway, it says, which is why South Carolina Republicans decided to put this on hold until the next session. Governor Henry McMaster was initially non-committal about a special session, then he called one, and this is the outcome. It was a complete betrayal, and it doesn't help the Senate Majority Leader, Shane Massey, Doesn't help that he was strongly opposed to this effort, too. It was all a setup, said former South Carolina State Rep Adam Morgan. So, Democrats defeated this effort, my friends. Again, it has echoes of exactly what happened here in my state. I don't want to rehash all of that with what's happened here, but actually my state senator, Rod Bray, who's up for re-election in 2028, you better be prepared for what's going to happen. There will be a candidate in this district who will attempt to defeat him in the primary, and I will be supporting that candidate. And we will do whatever we can to make sure that that candidate wins in the primary process. I've got no personal beef with Rod. I've met him a few times, chatted with him, nice guy. But again, I would say what my friend Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith has said. Rod doesn't understand what time it is in America, or he doesn't care. The stakes are high. Republicans have to quit shooting themselves metaphorically in the foot. And when we have political power, we better be prepared to wield it. I'm not saying to exceed what the Constitution allows. I'm saying to do what the Constitution allows in order to win politically. That has to be done. That has to be a priority here in this great nation. So, that being said, it's a good place to stop. When we get back from the break, I want to talk with you about what Stephen Miller was talking about. I got a clip of him talking about waste, fraud, and abuse that has been uncovered in this government. And he specifically, he's told us, well, how much of it there actually is. It might be shocking to some people. Friends, if you're curious about Kratom or just trying to figure out who you can trust, I want to introduce you to Christopher's Organic Botanicals. They're a family-run company. They offer natural, lab-tested kratom, not the synthetic garbage that's given kratom a bad name. Real kratom is responsibly sourced. It's tested for purity. It is not a synthetic. And this is what Christopher's is all about, providing you responsibly sourced kratom that is tested for purity. They work directly with farmers in Indonesia, follow the same traditions that have been trusted for generations. No gimmicks, no shortcuts, just clean, honest, just a clean, honest alternative for people looking for a more natural way to support their health. If you decide this is a product that's good for you, check out the Kratom Starter Pack. Coupon code ToddHuff saves you 10%. Christopher's Organic Botanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. Time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Told you that I was going to shift gears a little bit this segment, and we are going to do that. Stephen Miller's sitting down here beside J.D. Vance talking about fraud in this country and the amount of fraud that's happening in this country. This is something it's remarkable to me that people refuse to accept that we have massive amounts of fraud. Now, there are certainly people, hear me say this. Listen, I'm not a big proponent of social welfare programs. That doesn't mean that I don't care about people. Friends, I used to run a nonprofit organization. I'll just tell you, I ran a local Boys and Girls Club. We helped the kids in our community in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying that to toot my horn. I'm just saying that the organization, and lots of organizations, do good things. Volunteers that we had for the Boys and Girls Club did a lot of good things, tremendous things. And like I said, we met a lot of need. I have worked in the past when I lived in Washington, D.C., the church that I attended, we served the homeless by feeding them. In fact, I've shared this before at Lafayette Park, which is directly across from the White House. It was kind of a surreal environment when you have the White House and then a few hundred yards away or whatever, you've got homeless people that are not able to feed themselves, and at least, they were hungry sometimes. I'm a big proponent of people helping one another. I think real charity is what you decide to do with your money and your time. It's not charitable for you to say someone else is going to be forced to pay for that. I think that there's something fundamentally, I don't want to say wrong, because there might be an instance where states can have programs, but federal programs are just it's a scenario. They create a scenario where this sort of thing, fraud and waste, can be rampant. Every step you take something away from a local oversight or local provision, you're opening up the possibility for there to be more waste and fraud and abuse. And look, anybody I shouldn't say anybody, but if you've been to church, you've probably helped people. I remember taking Christmas gifts to people who couldn't provide Christmas gifts for their kids. I remember visiting people in the hospital. I mean, there's lots of things that we can do individually, and I think that we should do. I think that that's one of the things conservatism needs to explain better. It's not that we don't care about people who are hurting. We think that there's a better way to do it than to tell the federal government to get involved. The federal government gets involved, and you lose all sense of oversight as to what sort of expectations should be placed upon the individual. Some people say, well, just give them the money and don't ask any questions. Well, that sounds all well and good until you realize, I've shared this story before, until you realize that there are people that will abuse the system. This is human nature, by the way. This is not complicated. This is something that should be as evident as the noonday sun, but some people refuse to acknowledge it because it makes it sound like they're attacking people who are in need. I'm not attacking people who are in need. I'm pointing out the obvious, that the people in need, by the way, people who have plenty would do the same thing as well. There are people who abuse the PPP program, or there are people who have abused all sorts of things, who have taken out loans with the SBA, Small Business Administration, that were turned out to be fraudulent businesses or whatever. This is not just something that's reserved for people who are in need. This happens to people, with groups of people who are wealthy as well. It is human nature. There is a greed that we struggle with collectively. It doesn't mean every single person. There are some people who hate the fact that they're stuck on federal assistance and they have trouble getting out there. Maybe they're sick, maybe they're in a bad financial position, and it's just difficult. And I think maybe sometimes we don't listen. I'm a big guy. You have to work. The Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat. People should take responsibility for themselves, but sometimes things happen. Sometimes people quit buying. Sometimes you're just struggling to make ends meet. Sometimes there's unexpected health expenses or accidents or whatever. And so I get it. But we're not attacking the people in need. What we're doing is saying, look, we cannot continue to do this the way that we've been doing it when so much bad has happened with these monies. I started to tell a story. I'll briefly tell it. When I was in Washington, D.C., I was interning at a place called the Christian Defense Fund. We had set up a lunch, and I forget the lady's name and what exactly she did. But she basically knew all of the ways, all the services provided in Washington, D.C. for homeless folks. And we had a couple of homeless people walk up to us. We were actually in Chinatown on our way to lunch. It's crazy that I remember this all these years later, but we were, what's the name of the restaurant? It was the first time I had it's a popular Chinese restaurant. I'm just drawing a blank, but maybe it'll come to me. Anyway, so we're on our way to the restaurant, and there are a couple of homeless folks who are approaching us. So there's three of us from the Christian Defense Fund and this lady who basically knows all the services that are available for homeless people in the city. And so they approached us and she said, well, what do you need? She said, if you need shelter, you can go down to this street. They'll take you in. If you need food, you can go here or you can go here. If you're looking for help finding work, I mean, whatever. She was just rattling these things off. And I kid you not, they looked at her, they put their hand up and they said, lady, we're not talking to you. We're talking to these three people. And that's when it was just eye-opening to me, because you don't want to believe this, but there were people that were only approaching you because they wanted money for alcohol and drugs, and that's what this came to. And so she stepped in and she said, listen, they're not going to do this. We're going to go eat. And so she starts leading us. She's in the front. I'm in the back. And I promise you, in an attempt to intimidate us, they started walking on the backs of my shoes. Started stepping on the backs of my shoes. And I was a younger man. This sort of thing. I played football. It didn't intimidate me at all. I just thought I didn't know exactly what to do because I couldn't really let them do much more than that. But eventually they stopped and left us alone. And you can tell stories like that. You can acknowledge that there are real problems with abuse and waste and fraud in our federal programs without attacking the people who are in need. Now, I'll say one more thing, and I'll move on, and I'll try to get this clip in. Actually, I may have to play the clip next segment, but I want to say this as well. There's a popular saying or theme going around right now where people say Jesus is a socialist. This is popular today. And Jesus, let me say this, Jesus tells us to take care of the poor and the needy, the widowed and the orphan. But what we're never commanded to do is to do this through our government. He calls us to do this personally. And honestly, that's an effective, I mean, obviously the God in the flesh is going to know the best way to do this, right? So, but it's an effective way. It's an effective way to do this. It's compassionate. It's direct. There's accountability. It's not, if you're in a system, it's easy to be a number or just a person, right? Not Bill or Susie or whatever. And so it's more personal. It's a step towards being able to care not just for their physical needs, which of course are important, but also, most importantly, for their spiritual needs, to be able to share the love of Jesus with them. And so, but we're not commanded to say, hey, take someone else's money through the force of law and then give it to people just because, they need it, or someone else decides that they need it. That's not the way that we're supposed to be doing this. That's why charity and churches doing this is so much superior. One of the reasons. Friends, ever notice how some families have a plan that lasts for generations? That's not by accident. Full Suite Wealth works with people who want their wealth to make a difference for years to come. Their team brings together high-level investment strategies like private equity, private credit, and options strategies, coupled with expert legal guidance. It's all about making sure your vision becomes a reality for the people you love today and tomorrow. If you're looking to do more than just manage money, if you want to leave a mark and build something lasting, take a look at Full Suite Wealth, fullsuitewealth.com. Head there today, my friends. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Friends, I've got to take a time out. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Now going to play this soundbite that I have unintentionally teased. I wasn't trying to do that. I just sometimes have more to say about something than I first realized that I did. But Stephen Miller is sitting down here today, yesterday, talking about waste, fraud, and abuse in our federal programs. He's sitting next to J.D. Vance, making some big claims here that if true, are both eye-opening, even to those of us who follow this. It's eye-opening, and it would be, you don't want there to be this level of fraud in a program, but you do want, it is encouraging that we could potentially accomplish what Stephen Miller is about to tell us here. So that being said, with no further ado, as I've teased this enough, again, unintentionally, I don't try to do that on purpose. I just had more to say about this than I thought I would. So here's Stephen Miller talking about what's happening and the amount of fraud and so forth that's happening in our federal system.
All of the systems in our country, whether you're talking about voting, whether you're talking about entitlements, whether you're talking about welfare benefits, were set up based on the honor system. They're set up based on the idea that you could trust the average person through their own morality to abide by the rules and comply with the law. And so the way most welfare works in most states and most places is we take your word for it. If you thought a piece of paper and you say your kids are hungry, you are going to get food stamps. We don't check as a country if you even have kids. The fact is basic as that. We don't even check if you even have children. You will just start getting the checks. And so what's happened to our country is we became a society, as we've seen with the Somali refugee problem in Minnesota, where you have a large number of people that are not following the honor system. They're not playing by the rules. They're not abiding by our laws. And the amount that has been fleeced from us is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I believe, based on what I've seen and what I've heard, is that we could balance the federal budget if the only dollars that went out of the Treasury went to individuals who were properly, lawfully, correctly eligible to receive them. And that ultimately is going to be what we have to do as a country. In the meantime, because of the vice president's leadership, you are seeing the most muscular, robust, aggressive, dedicated, determined, and speedy effort to shut down criminal fraud that has not only ever occurred in the history of this country, but in any developed nation. So thank you.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. First, I want to hit on what he said at the beginning. He said that our system is set up on the honor system. I just want to pause there. That's the problem. That's the problem in a nutshell. We should never set up a system based upon the honor system. Now, I know people who are bleeding heart liberals may not like what I just said. Todd, are you trying to take food out of the mouths of people who are hungry? No, I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to do that at all. In fact, you don't want so many obstacles in place that self-respecting people won't participate. You know, it's embarrassing. And listen, I will acknowledge that a large percentage of the people who get these benefits, they don't want them. They need them. They found themselves in a predicament. I think sometimes some of you may disagree with me on that. Listen, I fully acknowledge that there are people who are taking advantage of the system as well. But I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of people don't like the idea of having federal assistance. They want to be able to provide it themselves. I think men are hardwired that way. So it doesn't mean that we're implicating everybody. An honor system for something like this that is so expensive to the American taxpayer is candidly irresponsible. That's what it is, the opposite of what I talked about earlier when I talked about, you know, the way that Jesus actually called his followers to get involved, which is personally involved. This system is impersonal. It has to be. It has to be. It's large. It's an entitlement. But like Stephen Miller said, is that it's based upon the honor system. And that doesn't work because there are people who've taken advantage of this. And he said that he thinks there's enough fraud in the system to balance our budget. Do you realize that? Listen, I'm not hoping that there's this amount of fraud in the system. I don't like that notion. That means that we've been wasting a lot of money for a long time is what that means. And people are laughing, as they say, all the way to the bank. Again, not everybody. Please don't misunderstand me. Some people are genuinely in need and are grateful. But some are doing this. These are the people that have to be stopped. I'm not talking about the people who really need it, even if I think that there's better ways to do it besides federal funding. I'm not even calling for that. What I'm saying here is, if this is accurate and true, on the one hand, it's a sad state of affairs that we would have allowed this to happen. But on the other hand, if we can get to the point where we have uncovered enough waste, fraud, and abuse to where there is no, well, there's actually, we have a balanced budget out of this. We cut expenses so much that the hole we put ourselves in each and every year, because we spend more than we bring in, we can actually save enough to where you can stop the negative spending, stop the deficit spending. That would be a remarkable thing. But I'm out of time, my friends. I appreciate you listening as always. I hope you have a great day. We will talk with you again tomorrow. SDG.